Lions Rock Productions.
Yeah, I can just see myself in a post-combat, debrief, and the patrol has gone fairly smoothly with some, questionable things, and have a guy, with a dip going, "You need to be more ethical, brother."
I don't even know what that means.
Exactly. Me neither. All right. So, one of the other things I wanted to lay down in terms of groundwork is, as service members, we tend to, and I'm going to be completely unfair when I say this, but we tend to focus on stoicism. I submit, as someone who's done a lot of combat time, that that isn't good enough, because focusing on yourself and seeking to not offend or be offended and all those kind of traditional stoic values doesn't work when you're attempting to, through modern conflict, bring stability to a foreign land, to build up the internal government, police force, military, all these things that we do in modern conflict. I don't think being stoic is the right solution to that problem. There's elements of stoicism in this, but I don't think that you can act that way, because we are so much a part of and an active change agent in these environments, and that changes how we approach our ethics, I think.
Yeah. So even though I hold the Stockdale chair in professional military ethics, I have a fair amount of skepticism about some versions. First of all, Stoicism is both a Greek and Roman tradition traditions that spans, depending on how you count, 400 or 500 years. So it's not just one person. We tend to focus, especially with Stockdale, we tend to focus on Epictetus, but there are lots of other Stoics. So I think Stoicism can be broadly helpful, but one of my issues with Stoicism is does not engage the emotions in a way that I think are necessary to be effective, particularly in combat, conventional or unconventional or whatever term you want to use. So yeah. I think Stoicism can be helpful, but it is largely understood as an individual sort of self-oriented philosophy. And, David Hume, who I wrote my dissertation on, who's a Scottish philosopher, was influenced by the Stoics, but he also argued that we had to have we couldn't just think about ourselves, we had to think about the community that we are a part, our moral obligations to other people, sentiment, all of these kinds of things. So I think Stoicism can be helpful, but I think it can also be harmful. I think in some ways, Stoicism may be contributing to things like moral injury, because it sets up expectations that you should be able to handle all this and it's no big deal and you just have to order your thoughts correctly and everything will be fine. And if you go back to James Stockdale and his time in internment as a POW, and you look at what he says about that, it is clear that he did rely on Stoicism in many ways. But he also, I would argue, engaged in what's called care ethics, and also wrestled with existentialism. He attempts to commit suicide, which is sort of Camus says that's the ultimate philosophical question of, should I live or should I die? So I think the Stockdale legacy is one of not tactical leadership, but strategic leadership, and therefore is much broader than simply Stoicism, because it was just about Stoicism. He would have effectively, he was in command, but he welcomed people back into the fold after they had broken under torture. He engaged in an ethic of care, both for himself, for other people, as well as for his captors.
Yeah.
Like his captors, he was able to develop rapport and relationships with them in certain kinds of ways that we might find surprising, unless you've read the works of Nelson Mandela, who essentially does the same thing. So I think it's much more complicated. So I worry about the military's narrow focus, not just on Stoicism, but on a very particular kind of Stoicism that is very popular right now. And some of the versions of it that are popular right now are really nothing more than self-help schlock. Sorry, it's just true. It's so overly simplified that as a philosopher looking at this, I'm like, And we have the Stockdale Leaders course at the Navy War College, and so we spend time talking about this. And we all love Stockdale. Like I'm thrilled to have a chair that bears his name, but I also think he would be the first person to say this is more complicated. So.
It is, and I would say that, from my own personal experience, there's a level below tactics, the ground truth level, where things get really crazy because it doesn't make sense even 2 echelons above, like at the platoon level. The reality that you experience when you're on a patrol in a given area is dramatically different than what happens at brigade or battalion or even company, because they're oftentimes not co-located. And to assign a basic set of ethical values to get things right, it doesn't work. You can't reliably make that happen. And let me give you a concept that I've kind of come up with is we have these patrols that go out, these packets of help. You've got farm help, you've got, whatever, like small business help, all these different aid elements, female engagement, and they all go out. But you reach a point well before all of these elements are put together of what I would call ethical saturation, where you putting so many good things in the bucket, there's no more room for it. And so you end up with these negative outcomes. Like you go out and you engage women without part of the thing in our paper is like you seek to improve the condition of women without knowing the condition of the women, and replace women with farmers, business owners, governmental, anybody. So that care, like the do no harm part, we're completely absent from that because we're really focused internally on what does my boss want? The commander says we have to do this. And part of what I would do is I would say, hold on, as soon as you say that, I know we're in the wrong spot. Our mindset is wrong. It's not about your boss. It's about what's possible here. And the boss is actually the governor, not your commander who's 500 miles away.
Yeah, so in my book on obedience, I talk about professional judgment and discretion, which is a version of Aristotle's virtue prudence. And that is the form of thought he thought was necessary to be virtuous. It's not wisdom, it's not anything else, it's prudence. And so I think while we can have conversations about categorical imperative or utilitarianism or virtue ethics or care ethics, and those are all really helpful rehearsals, help you think through problems in advance, context really matters. So what we need are people who can exercise that judgment and discretion in the field, adjusting to what the context is, what the reality is, understanding things like culture, gender, race. I mean, we're in a national moment right now where it's really clear that many people don't understand those basic things, much less try to integrate that with any kind of ethical framework that they have. And context does matter, which is not to say everything's relative, but you do have to, especially in care ethics, I have to parent my 2 teenage boys differently because they are different human beings and they need different things. And the idea that I could somehow just have one set of parenting rules and it's going to work across time, space, the same as that when they were toddlers, it'll still work now that they're teenagers. I mean, that's kind of crazy when you think about that, right? And so it's not that everything's relative, but it is that you have to be able to make ethical judgments, justify what you're doing, think through what you're doing, be able to deliberate, engage in reflection, both before, during, and after, because whatever you assess afterwards is what's going to feed into your next engagement or your next action. So it's quite complicated, which is why I don't think you can train for it, because training, that tends to be skill focused. Being ethical is not a skill.